It's like really stupidly long. Yeah, all you gotta do is write the CL. Yeah, I don't have I can never tell the difference. Yeah, but use that for putting it. This is all. We had a 2-hour limit. No. Just that you can do it out. But just about $20 a week. This had 2-hour time limit. I'll choose from.
While we're getting everybody in the meeting, I need you to look this up. The CRUD in regards to databases. Let me try to finish attendance here while you're finding that. Well, that didn't work. Here's Jake. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Are you finding stuff? What does CRUD mean? Do you see it? Because when you take the capstone class with Dr. Ford, she's going to look at you and say, take a CRUD application.
How did you get this far in the class? That's what she's going to say to me.
So you better know what it is. So are you finding stuff? Or are you just finding trade things? So we're talking about create, read, update, delete. So just a regular database application. I just wanted you to be aware of that term or acronym or whatever you would like to call it, because some people like it a lot. And I'm one of those people that's just a little bit too rigid with some rules. So to me, CRUD is a little misleading because it says create. So I always think they want me to create a table, but they just mean create entries in a table, update them, and delete them. So we're talking about our database and adding entries to a table modifying the entries that are there and deleting them. In this chapter, they have a big, complete application that shows you step by step how to do the SQL code to create a manually controlled CRUD application. Remember, I was telling you last time, there are many ways for us to interact with the database using C#. And so this manual way of doing it that we go through in this chapter is just one way. Get some people changed here. We'll count them. So in our textbook, they're going to do a great job, and we're going to do just in a few minutes walking through how to create string tables using SQL Server. So whenever we're looking at creating a database application, the first thing that we're going to be concerned about is the size of the application. How many users are we going to have? Are we just going to have 1 or 2 users? Are we going to have 20 users? Are we going to have 1,000 users? Because we can use different database management systems depending on the size of the system that we have. So I want to show you how to use Access really quickly just to create a small database application, our very first one, so that we can outline all of the different pieces that we have to have. And then we'll jump into the chapter and look at the bigger application that they have us create. So we'll kind of start a little small. So instead of opening Visual Studio to start off, I'm going to open Microsoft Access. Now, people at home, if you don't have Access, that's okay. You can watch along with us, but everybody can get Access for free along with their other Office products. Let me show you how real quick. If you go to office.com and sign in using your OTC account, you can click the Install Office button and it'll download and install Word and Excel and PowerPoint, all those things. But if you click the down arrow and you go to other install options, and it loads eventually, I think you go to Apps and Devices, and right here, you have a different Install Office option. And this option includes Access, OneNote. I don't know. I think the free one installs OneNote. I don't know why the main button doesn't install Access. But Access is always considered a higher level product than just the regular Office products. So if you think about users, our default users of different products in Microsoft's eyes, word processing is a certain level of a user, and then a next step up level user would be an Excel user, and then a next step up user would be a developer that uses Access. So they just don't even include it in the standard download and install, but you can get it real easy. It's free along with all of your other stuff. Okay, so you can grab that if you don't have it at home. When you first open Access, just like a lot of the Microsoft products, it shows you templates. We need to create a blank database. Whenever we create databases, we do things a little differently, and we'll see this when we get into SQL Server also. We allocate space for the database at the very beginning, and then we just keep adding stuff to it. So we have to say where we want to save this database before we can open it. Most of our Microsoft products, we're used to being able to, edit a Word document and then do file save or save as and save it at that point. With Access, that's not how it works. We have to save the database first, and then we can use it. Now, we can also, it's a little harder to do a save as. We would just need to copy or move the entire database file. So everything we create in this database, all of the tables and entries inside the tables and any other sort of queries or anything we create are going to be saved within this one physical file. So let's put it someplace where we can find it. I'm going to just save it, I think, for the moment to my desktop. And I'm going to call this, I think this is going to be our inventory database for our cars. And Microsoft Access is automatically going to set the file type for a database file once I've got my location and file names that I can create. Access knows that it's all about tables, and so the first thing it does is go into the Create Table wizard, and it's ready right here to have you add columns to a new table. I'm actually going to be looking at page 818 in our textbook, where they talk about creating the inventory table so that we can create this same table using Access so that you guys can see how easy it is to go from one database management system to another. So let me get myself to the right place here.
Eric wants me to let you know he's waiting to get flooded.
He's what?
Waiting to get flooded.
Oh, it's not letting him in. I can't, I kind of fix internet issues. All right, so we've got a table design here that we're ready to use. And for any table, we have to specify what columns we want on this table. Well, when I look at Microsoft Access, this first tool, the View tool, is a really important one. I'm going to click the drop down on it. Using that tool, I can change my current view from datasheet view, which is like an Excel spreadsheet looking at the data I have in my table, to design view. And right now, we're in design view, but it's a datasheet design. I'm going to click design view. And to go into design view, I need to name my table. This is going to be our inventory table. I'm going to name it all in uppercase because that's what our database book has been doing with things. So we'll just do that same type thing. Now, when I create my table in design mode, I'm ready to add columns. And for each column, I'm going to tell Access what the data type is of that column. And down here at the bottom, I have some additional properties for that column that I could set if I wanted to. Like, right now, the default is long integer. I could make it a short integer, whatever I wanted to. So for our application, the first field or column that they want on our table is car ID. So let's change that name from ID to car ID. Within our textbook, they kind of standardize on ID being capital I, lowercase d. We'll try to follow that, but we'll see some places, I think, where they jump around a little bit on that. The next column that they have in our database is the make. Now, I didn't worry about the data type for the car ID because Access by default set that to auto number. That means that Access is going to automatically assign a car ID as we insert rows into our table. So we don't have to worry about it. Auto number is going to be saved as a long integer, and Access is automatically going to increment new values. You can see up here too that Access has already made that the primary key of our table. That's why it's got that little key icon. So it's doing a lot for us to try to help us. All right, our make then, short text is a good choice. Notice that that could go up to 255 characters, but it's variable. Spaces won't be saved. So Access is not going to save all 255 characters every time we insert a row. Now, the next thing that we have in our inventory table is the color. And our color is also a short text or a string. We can do this drop down and see what other kind of data types we have available. We could do short text, long text, number, big number, date, time, currency, auto number like our ID field. We could do a Boolean. An OLE object is online linking and embedding. So that would be like a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet or something I could embed in my database table. Hyperlink, link to some website. I could add an attachment. So lots of different data types that we can have in our access table. Now after color, we have pet name. So for our database, they like to have the little name for their car. And that's it. That's all we need. So we're ready to put some data into our database. I'm going to change my view to datasheet view, save my table, and I'm ready to just type in new rows into my table. So they want us to have, let's type some of these in. We'll do a little data entry today as we create our tables. Now our Volkswagen here is black and they call it Zippy. I have a Volkswagen, but it's red and I call it the Volkswagen. My names are not very good. Next, our Ford is rust colored and it is named Rusty. And we have a Saab and our Saab is black and it's named Mel. Now notice as we go how I'm just being really smooth and easy at getting this data entered. I'm just pressing tab between fields as I go, and then I'm pressing enter to move down to a new row when I want to type in a new row. If I made a mistake and I wanted to change something, I could just click in the column and change it just like Word. If I wanted to delete a row, I could come over here to the edge and I could right click and delete that record. I could also press the delete key to get rid of it. So as I'm moving through, it's easy to navigate. Okay, so next thing I have is a Hugo, and it is yellow, and we call it Clunker. BMW, that is black, and it is Bimmer. And then we have another BMW that is green, named Hank. Oops. That typo for you. One more BMW that's pink, and this is Pinky. And finally, oh, that's it. The last one that they have is showing an empty entry. So those are the entries in our table. So we've seen from our database class that we don't normally just have like one table like this in a database. But for us to get started, we want to simplify things. So we're just going to have this one table. Let's see how we would access it. I'm ready to close out of Access because I don't need it anymore. My database file is created on my desktop. It's sitting out there. I'm going to open it and use it in my program. Everybody get their database table created okay? Any help or anything with it? Because we want to be able to access it. So I'm just going to close out. Oh, sorry, hang on. Now, this is good anyways. When I reopen Access, it's not going to have anything open. I see my table over here in my All Access Objects window, and I can just double click on my table to reopen it to see my data for Erin. I'm just closing things and going like crazy. Okay, so let's get Visual Studio open. And I want to create a new project for this one. And I'm going to use a forms-based project so that we can display the output from our inventory table on a form. I can find it, I'm kind of blind this one. All these awesome things we have. There it is. So I want to give it a name. Do chapter 21, or you could do lesson 9, or however you're organizing things. Hopefully better than me. I'm going to get there someday. But for today, I'm going to name this chapter 21, first database access. Because I want to be able to remember that that's what this one is, because it's an example. You guys are going to see that there's so many different ways that you can set things up. You can make it really hard or really easy. One thing about doing things the way we're going to in this first application, we are just getting an idea of how to access our data. So this application is not an example of a world-class database access application, right? This is an example of the lowest form, lowest life form. I've got one table in access and I'm trying to get to it and display it for my users. So we can go all the way from a low-end kind of application like this to high-end, and that's why we have 3 chapters of database stuff, because we're going to be able to do some exploring. The more tools I use to automate things in Visual Studio, the more I've lost control, right? So we saw last time on Monday, a lot of people had used that data source control to handle the list box, and that works so awesome because we have that array already built. Why not just connect it to our list box as the data source? Why do we have to go through this code? Well, every time we do that, we are making ourselves more dependent upon that feature, right? So if we want to do something to customize the way things work, we're going to have to find a way to do that within that feature. If we do everything manually, like load up that list box ourselves in our code, then any sort of customization that comes along, we can handle it, right? Because we're already doing it manually. So we always have to worry about those trade-offs. You know, that development time is so much more if we're doing it manually. We have more room for errors. But if we use those automated tools, we risk getting trapped within that tool and having to redo. So yes, this is the lowest life form, right? Let's fix up our form. We haven't done forms too much, so I want to fix up my form just a little bit. Remember, any properties that we change on our base form become like our default. So I just want to change a couple of things. I'm going to change my text to be access database inventory. And I think I'll put a color. I'm going to make a back color here. I don't know what I want today. Something that's, how about Peru? And then I'll change my fore color to be nice and matchy-matchy with it. Saddle brown, how's that? That looks good. I want to increase my font size so that everybody can see it a little bit better. Resize my form a little bit. Beautiful. Get my example out of the way here. Now, in our example, I'm going to go ahead and put a label up at the top to be kind of just a heading. And this label, I want it to be big. So I'll go like to, I don't know, 18-point font or something. And for my text property, I'll put inventory. I'm working with a database here, which means I'm going to have external files. I'm going to have things that could, you know, cause errors and things that are outside of my control. So I need to make sure that I have some sort of message status bar or something down at the bottom. Lots of things that I could use. I'll put a label down at the bottom of my form. And I think that I'll name my label LBL message. I think that was my phone. Maybe somebody else's phone. The speaker was disconnected. Okay, LBL message. And in my text property, let's put a nice message like inventory display. We could say welcome to or whatever you want. So whenever this opens, I think I want it to just be empty. And I want to have a button that we click that makes the inventory display. Let's put a list box to hold that information. And I'll name this LST inventory. I guess LSTBX, huh? I was getting away from our kind of developed standard. List box of our inventory. And then the only other thing I need is a button. And my button will be named BTN show. And we'll just make it say show, because it's going to show our inventory. I'm going to fix its color. My phone is being friendly today with the mic thing. Okay, questions? Anybody? Spots you need? Things you didn't get? Everybody got it? Awesome. So our little form here is ready to go. One thing that I want to do, though, is kind of clean up my area. First of all, I've left my form named Form 1. That's okay. You know, we've been leaving it Form 1 just for simplicity's sake. But if I'm going to start really organizing my projects the way I need to, because I'm going to need to separate things out in my project, I really should give it something more reasonable as a name. So let's call it, I'm going to right click on my form1.cs and rename. Remember, if you do this and you do it incorrectly, it will mess up your form. So make sure you're looking at the form1.cs, the top level object here of your form when you're renaming. And I'm going to name this something to do with user experience. So I got to turn off my, is that me? I'm going to turn off my Bluetooth and see if I can get it to stop it. Maybe that will help. You can't hear it, but this little speaker thing is up here disconnecting and reconnecting to my phone. All right, so let's call this UX inventory, because it's going to be our user experience. And I want to rename it. And then when I get all the messages about, do you want to rename everything to do with this? Yes, yes, I do. Now we should see both of the sub items, the back behind the scenes code items, get their names changed too. If you get errors at this point, we want to stop and fix them. Just to make sure, I'll go ahead and run my application. Make sure it'll compile with my blank form. I don't have any errors because of renaming, okay? Now to further organize, I'm going to end up with just different specialty areas in each of my applications. I'm going to end up with my user experience, my business objects layer, and my data access layer. So in order to work towards that way, let's create a folder here in our project. So I'm going to right click again on the project and add a folder. And I'm going to call this folder UX for user experience. And I'm going to drag my form into that folder. It complains about it. It might take a long time, but then it just pops right in there. Now for this project, because we are just kind of doing the base level data access, we're going to end up merging all of these different layers of things into this one form. So we won't need to have a bunch of different folders, but I want you to start thinking about organizing your project. Notice I'm not going to do anything with any of the stuff that was generated by Visual Studio. I'm not going to move my references into that folder or anything like that. I've got to leave all of those components in the root of the project folder, but I can move my components like the form. Okay, so let's get this thing working. Double click your button, and when somebody clicks our show button, we're going to start accessing our database. But before we can do that, we need to have a using clause. We have a bunch that Visual Studio has popped in there for us, and that's great. But the using clause that we're going to use depends on what type of database management system we're accessing. And we're going to see some really nice ways of handling this from our textbook as we get involved in the textbook application examples. For us, we're going to be using Access. So if I went out to Google and I searched using Microsoft Access in Visual Studio or in C#, I would start finding information, and it would tell me that the class libraries that know how to read data from Microsoft Access are in the SQL client library. So that's the one that I need to use for Microsoft Access. Whenever I'm pulling in that class library, that's really considered a data provider because it contains all of the code I need to access data from the access provider, whatever provider it is that I'm using. So I'm getting my database provider information set up. Now, whenever I start with my actual application, I'm going to go ahead and set up some class level fields. In the way our application is set up, we could really have these objects allocated within our button code, but we're going to go ahead and put them at the class level because that's where we would normally want them. The first thing I'm going to have, is not that, is a private, and this data type is going to be my connection object. So it's going to be an SQL connection type object. I'm going to name it DBCONN. And I'm going to put a comment over here. This is an object to hold our connection. Along with that, I'm going to need a string variable to hold what's called our connection string. And our connection string is going to have the information like the name of our file that holds our database, any security information we might need, things like that. So this string will hold our connection string. And this connection string is going to vary, again, by service provider. So if I got a new job next week and I started working with Oracle databases and I hadn't been doing that lately, I would have to do some Googling. What's the connection string for Oracle? How would I establish that connection string? I'd have to do some research because it would be a little different than what I was used to. Or I could find some code that already had it in it. Now the next object that I need to allocate is called the command. So its class name is SQL Command. And I'm going to name this object DBCMD for database command in our code. This object is going to hold our SQL command. So if we say select all of the items from my inventory, that select command is going to be processed by this command processor. The actual command, the SQL code, is going to be stored in this string named SQL. Hold our SQL code. So just like if we wanted to issue a select statement against a table that we'd created on SQL Server, we would open the SQL Management Studio and we would say new query, then we would be in command mode ready to issue that SQL command. We're getting ourselves set up to do that same thing externally from our program code. So now we've got that command screen kind of open, ready to type our SQL in that we can send to it. Now we need one more thing, one more object, and this is going to be an SQL data reader. We'll call it DB reader. And this is just going to be a collection that's going to be all of the data that was returned from our SQL command. So our command object is going to hold the actual SQL command, and it's going to put the result set into our reader. Now we do need to create a class to hold our inventory data. So I want to do that real quick. We could copy it from their information in the textbook, but it's just as quick for us to create one. In our project, we're going to be expecting this reader object to be full of inventory objects, right? Inventory table rows. So let's create a class that knows about inventory table rows. First, I'm going to create a new folder. This is going to be my business objects folder. I'm trying to keep these layers separate, the different layers that could be run on different computers, and we'll talk more about that as time goes on. For now, we're just going to start splitting up our project. Now, in this business objects folder, I want to put a new class. So I could do project, add class. And my class is going to be named inventory. The same as my table, only it's going to be lowercase, starting with an uppercase character. Now, my business objects folder contains my inventory.cs file. One thing to notice about that, notice how the namespace was affected. It now contains our folder name. At this point, we don't really want that, so let's get rid of it. If we were working with a real high-level application, we would want those separate namespaces, but for now we don't. So our inventory class doesn't have very many things. We have our private I'm thinking we could just do that public properties like they like to do in our book. So we have, first of all, an integer for our car ID. And I want my getters and setters just to be kind of dynamic for that thing. And then we have a string for our make. And a string for our color. And finally, a string for our pet name. Now we'll need to add more to our class. At some point, but I think that might be all we need for now. Let's see if we can get away with that. Our minimum class here. We like the minimum class definition ever. So whenever, see, I'm going to save this. And I'll make it public. Now going back to our form code, it was declaring all of those variables, and I kind of veered off there because our database reader is going to be full of these inventory objects. So I wanted to create that class. So to handle each of our inventory objects, we are going to need an instance variable that is our inventory class data type. And that is going to be an item. How about that? And we'll say this is just one of our inventory rows. So each of these different data items we have set up and different objects that we have allocated are going to be helpful to us as we move along. On Canvas, make sure I saved these updates of everybody making it. If you look at our modules, in lesson 9, there's this ADO data provider flowchart. I want to download it because I want to change it. Remember I said we were just going to get to the basics here, down and dirty, and make a really basic application. This flowchart gives us each of the components that we have to use to be able to make this application work. So we start with our database kind of at the top. Our database, we named that table inventory, and I named the database itself inventory. And so I'm going to click here and name it. It is inventory.accdb. If you see your file type, you should see that file type for that access database. That's going to be important to us in our code because we have to match that up exactly to make sure we get the right file. Now, the next thing in this flow chart says that my database is at the top, but it has to have a connection object that knows how to connect to it. I'm going to click here. We named our connection object DBCONN for database connection. The connection object that connects to the database takes care of that part, but then the command object uses the connection to pass the SQL command in and get the data back. So our command object we named DBCMD. All of the data that gets returned from our SQL command is going to be placed in this data adapter. Notice this flowchart doesn't show the data flow. It shows the object dependencies. So this data adapter or data reader is dependent on the command object. The command object is dependent on the connection object. and the connection object connects us to the database. So all these things have to be connected to each other for us to be able to get any data. So our data adapter or our data reader, we called it DB reader. Now, we don't have anything in our code yet about a data set or a data grid. So right now, we'll just leave those pieces empty. So we're going to be using these three object types, a DB reader, a DB command object, and a DB connection object. So the flow chart is just a way for us to visualize how these are dependent upon each other so that we can make sure we have all of the pieces built properly. Now, before I can display any data from the database, I want to make sure that I have it in a try-catch structure, because again, I'm leaving the confines of Visual Studio and asking the operating system to open that database so I could have some sort of error. I'm going to put a long comment here so that you have it. We're going to construct an object of the OLE DB connection class to store the connection string. And our connection string is representing the type of data provider, which is our database system, and the source, the actual database. So not only is our connection going to know what our file name is, it's going to know that it's an access database. So our connection string is going to be formatted pretty ugly. Let's set it up. We're going to start out with our server. Whoops, I'm looking at the wrong one. Hang on. It's trying to open something for me. Back up this train. I was looking at the wrong one. We're going to see how easy it is to switch things. First of all, the using up here should be system.data.oledb. That makes more sense with that comment. I was looking at that thinking, this doesn't seem right. Now, as soon as I do that, notice how that messes up all of my connection objects. Don't worry, no big deal. I'm going to change this word SQL to OLEDB. And then I'm going to do the same thing in this word SQL, OLEDB. And finally, instead of SQL data reader, OLEDB. So I was looking at my example for SQL server, which we'll be doing with our textbook, instead of my example for access. So I had to fix that. So you can see it's really easy to switch between one database management system and another. Just a few little change all keywords for us, but our book's going to show us a way to make it even easier. All right, now I've got all of my ducks in a row for which database I'm using. Let's create the correct connection string. The server statement is not necessary to get to access. For access, I need a provider statement instead. And my provider is going to be Microsoft.ace.oledb.12.0. And then I'm going to put a semicolon. And the semicolon goes inside the string because it's part of the connection string. Now I'm going to add more because that's not quite all of it. After I put that provider, I need to specify the file name. Our file is inventory.accdb. Is that what I said earlier? Yep. And that's going to end my connection string, so I can put a semicolon after my closing double quote. I could have set that up here when I allocated this connection variable also. So either place would be fine, just setting up our string that we need to connect to our database. You can see I've got some really dangerous information in there, file names, things like that, that I don't like hard-coded. So we might try to find different ways to handle that. But in the base world, we have to have that connection string set up. Now we're going to actually open our connection by saying, I want to set my connection to a new instance of a connection using our connection string. So at that point, we're actually opening or establishing our database connection, and then we'll issue the open command to actually open it. I want to test at that point so that we can get our files all situated before we put the rest of our code in. So let's go ahead and complete our try catch. I want to catch any type system.exception, and I'll call that exception object exe. And I want to set up our label to hold that exception message. Okay, I should be able to run this, and I should see an exception message that the file's not found, because I have this specification set to say that this access database should be in my bin debug folder, my current project folder, and it's not. I haven't put it in there yet. So I should have an error. So I'll click my show button, and there it is. The Microsoft OLE DB 12.0 provider is not registered on the local machine. That's not what I was expecting. Let's see what we've got to do about that. I'm going to go search. You can see it's a common problem. Well, you need to install it from 2013. Let's hope I can install it. Here's a newer one. How about it? So I would like to find a solution from Microsoft. Which one do you like? I could do Stack Overflow, I guess. There should be a new one. So what we need to find is this 2007 Office System Driver. So I see it in this Stack Overflow article linked. If you can find that, I think it's going to link us to someplace else that's newer. And mine just automatically started a download of that database engine executable. You probably have to do this at home too, because again, when you install Access, for some reason they're not installing this engine. I'm going to go ahead and run this executable. Okay. Now, if everything goes according to plan and nice and smooth, we should not get that error message about the jet engine. Is there a 2016 one? We should probably get it. Let's see if we need it or if it matters. I think it's pretty similar. We'll try. There we go. So now we're getting the error message we should get. One of the hardest things for us as developers, right? Because How do we know which error message is the one that matters? Well, take the error message and Google it, the actual message, because that's the only way you're going to know. And when you Google that actual error message, then you're going to find something that either leads you to a Windows problem or a database problem or a problem with your code. But yes, it can be difficult to tell. That's why the software developers get the big bucks, right? Because sometimes things are it's really hard to tell where the problem is. So now the problem is mine because I can't find my database file. So let's fix that. Lots of things I could do. I could put in that complete path name to my database file, which is what I would want to do if it were sitting on some server somewhere. Or I could just copy it into my bin debug folder, and you know that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to right click on my solution and open my folder in File Explorer. And you can do however you like to do it. I'm going to open my bin debug folder and I'm going to drag my inventory database in there. Now, because my desktop is set up on my OneDrive, and right now my source folder is set up on the C drive of this local computer, that did a move. My database is no longer on my desktop, because if you move from one device to another, it actually moves it. So make sure you're aware of whether your inventory database is still on your desktop on your OneDrive or not. Mine isn't, which is fine. But
which version of
it doesn't really matter if you whichever one you're looking at should be okay.
because the latest one is giving me a weird error, and it's weird. When I download the 64-bit version, it tells me that I have 32-bit Office installed, so I have to use 32. But when I go to use 32, it says 64, and it won't install.
So do that 2010 one that I use. Let's see where it is. The link said the 2007 Office system driver, but it took me to an Office 365 page. Let me pop this one. Let me share it in the chat. There you go, it's in the chat. See if that one will work. I would say it's probably the same one because I think Microsoft pretty much has it set to where everything on the interwebs points to the same one. It's going. There it is. It's finally there. Now, if you get that installed and it cooperates with you, and you get your database copied into your bin debug folder, when you click show, basically nothing should happen because we shouldn't get any errors, but we shouldn't do anything yet because we haven't added any code to do anything. So we just are happy at that point with no errors. Is it working? Is that one working, Tori, or is it mad?
I got this. I installed the 2010 version, but nothing's changing.
It won't work much more. You might have to go to that computer next to you. Fix that one. We have plenty. I'm not sure this is all.
So you just turn. Get a pop.
Still use, but you're already back. So I think that a different one I had to lose. That's what I'm saying, it's still on. Yeah. Sorry, that's all you have.
I don't know why
I feel bad.
silly.
I feel bad being sorry on your side.
That's fine.
Okay.
So now, copy your database.
I don't like my next sources.
Uh-huh. So you can close that.
Power.
You save that as a
On our two,
I've been getting A's this
How are you
semester.
doing here?
That's what we're talking
Your
about.
project. Yours okay? Working all right?
I
Good
have
job.
been shaving
Yours
the
okay?
A's.
You bet you do it.
Yeah, I think we're just like,
It's better.
long lasting.
Working. Great. Okay, so access does cause a little bit of installation trauma, but we're set. How's everybody at home? Not working? What's it doing to you? Here, show us.
Whoever said
Show us, Aaron. Let's see what it's doing. You can share. Okay, I admitted you.
Okay, so let's hide that. Ugh. Move that to the bottom. Okay. So when I'm running it, if it'll do it for me. Sorry, I'm playing with Zoom settings right now because they're just in the way.
I know.
There we go. Let's pause that and let's rerun it. Stop Zoom, go away. Okay, so right now I'm getting this error. Could not find a normal.
You're getting some messages there in the chat. They're saying data is source, not sauce.
Did I really misspell it? That sounds like me. Yeah, my keyboard is not the most reliable.
I know, those stupid keyboards. I hate this one. Okay, he's got the sauce fix. See if it works.
Yeah,
Yay!
Thank you.
Good job, guys. I could have looked at it forever. We've missing it. Okay, let's make this thing work now. So all we did so far was get our connection open. Woohoo, that was good. Because it took us a little bit, didn't it? Now, let's create our database reader object. So we named it DB reader. Whoops. I got ahead of myself. Let's go above that. We'll come back to it because I got sidetracked. Imagine that. Build an SQL command to run. So first thing we got to do, set up our string. That's our SQL command. Now this is SQL syntax, but it's buried in here as a string. So that means that the compiler here, the C# compiler, is not going to check your syntax of your SQL statement. So if you have some sort of problem in your SQL statement, you're just not going to get anything back from the server. You won't know that that is the problem. You may not even get a message back telling you that it couldn't figure out what your SQL statement was. So formatting these SQL strings can be a real problem because we can make a lot of syntax errors because they can be really long. These are the kinds of things you might want to open up an SQL processor and copy and paste and make sure that things run, but we can get into trouble that way. Now we want to select star or everything from our inventory table. And I'm going to put a space there at the end of that and add more. Then I'm going to say to order by, what do we want to sort this by? Let's sort it by the color, since we have so many different colors. And we'll say we want that to be ascending. And I just want to make this SQL statement longer. So I'm just trying to kind of drag it out as much as possible so that it is longer than it really needs to be. After color, let's sort by make. The ascending command doesn't need to be included because that's the default, but we'll put it in there just to make it longer. Now my SQL statement needs to end with a semicolon, so I need the semicolon inside my SQL string, and then I need the semicolon outside my SQL string to end my C# statement. So this is a really good place to use the debugger and set a breakpoint or something and make sure that this variable is getting set up properly. Now that we've got our SQL statement ready to run, we can set it up as a command. So let's create our command object. And then one of the things that our command object, one of its properties is command text. And in its command text property, it wants to have some SQL code. So if you look at this code, we really didn't need this SQL variable, right? We could have just popped this SQL code directly into that command text property. Using that variable, though, gives us a good place to do debugging and troubleshooting and make sure we get that code set up properly, but we don't have to. Now we are ready to actually set up our command. We're going to tie the OLE DB command object to the OLE DB connection object so that now our command knows what database to use. We've got to update our command object, and our command object has another property called connection, and that connection property wants to know about a DB connection object. So now we tied those two together. And think about our flow chart here. We've made our connection. We did that at the very beginning. Now we have built our command. So we have our SQL statement in our command object, and we are now tying it to that connection so that we can make those connections. So I could update this here and say our DB command object is using our SQL variable. It needs that. So I've got those ties made. Now we're ready to actually execute our command. To do that, we have to create a DB reader object. That one I already have the comments for. And our DB reader object is built a little different than a lot of other instances. We're going to say, set up this reader by looking at the command object and running its execute reader method. So our command object has already been associated with some SQL syntax, and it's been associated on the other end with the database. So now we're saying execute that SQL and put the results into this DB reader object. So the reader will contain our result set from our SQL command. Now with our reader, there's a few ways we can access it, but we're going to read each row of data. So think about it as like a whole nother table that's been returned to us. So while we can read rows, while we can read, we're going to loop. And in our loop, every time we get a row, we know we have a new inventory item. What do we call our inventory? An item. Now this new inventory item is going to have some special things associated with it. We have to get our column data out. So let's see, first of all, we're going to be saying that our car ID is going to be equal to some data that we can find in the database reader. And that data is going to be labeled with our column name, car ID. And we want to take that car ID and we want to format it as an integer. I'm going to leave it right now that way and see if we have to do anything with it or not. What's it saying? Cannot implicitly convert type object to int. So can we cast it? Let's try a cast. It likes it. The next field that we have then is our make. We're going to go to the reader and we're going to look for the column that is labeled make. When we find it, it's going to be an object again, so we're going to convert it to a string. We know how to handle it because it's a string. Why is it mad at me? I'm not good with this syntax. Do I not need the, there we go. I'm putting too many curly braces in. Sorry, I'm not. It's a syntax that I haven't used a lot, but I'll get used to it. So as we allocate our object here, I'm going to go ahead and get the rest of our columns. We're going to get our color from our reader. And you can tell what we're doing here. What we have to do is look at the returned data, and inside this database reader, each of our columns is going to be associated with its column name. Finally, our last one is going to be our pet name. And again, we can make it just be a string. So our weird syntax: create an object by specifying each of the properties using the name. And we've created then a new instance of our inventory object called an item from that row that we just read out of the reader. So we had to do some work here to get down into this level of accessing our data. Now we finally got that item ready. Let's add it to our list box. That inventory item. I'm going to label this closing curly brace. That's the end of our while. Got a little long on us. Here's the end of our try. So between the end of our while and the end of our try, we have to do just a little bit of work to finish things up. And that's close our connection objects. So some of the objects that we need to close our reader. And we need to close our connection. Rich is saying, please close it because people will leave connections open and the database locked and cause all sorts of trouble. So we want that to not happen. So let's review what we've done here. We had to set up our information for how to access our database. And then we opened our connection to the database. Then we built our SQL command that we're going to use. And then we built our command object so that it's ready to run that command. Then we said that we wanted the command results to be placed into our reader. And when we did that, when we said execute reader, is when our SQL command was actually executed and the results were placed in this collection called the DB reader. We then looped through all of the rows in our reader, and for each row, we pulled out each of the columns of information to build our inventory object for that row, and then added that to our list box. When we're all done with our reader, we're closing the reader and closing the connection to release our resources. So let's try running it. That doesn't seem right. Why are we getting that? Do you know? This is like a test. Troubleshooting test. We've just had to do all sorts of troubleshooting today. You know what it is? Do you want me to tell you? Anyone from home know? Whenever we add our item to our list box, what method is being run to add that data to our list box? If we just mention toString, we don't have a toString method. So our class, our inventory class, we made as little as possible, a little too little. So let's add that. So in my inventory class, I need to add my toString. I'm doing something wrong. Now it's happier. It's just mad at me because I'm not returning a string. So we can do it however we want. Let's set up a string variable as our return string. I think that will work. Why is it mad at me? Is it mad at all of you guys for this? What am I doing? Did I? That's what I was wondering. It's almost like it is. Oh, I did. Thank you so much. It's like, yeah, it's acting like crazy. Those getters and setter formatting making me nuts. That's better. Thank you. You've got it all. Go ahead and test it and see if yours is working. Go ahead and update our label status also to tell our user that the database information was loaded. And be sure to put your return statement in. I think I got it. Now, when I show, I should see some stuff. I need, because I did the \n in my toString, I need to add a space at the beginning of each of those or before the \n, and I need to make my list box bigger. So I'm going to do those things. In my inventory class, I'll just add a space before each of the \n. And notice I did that even on the last one, even though I don't need it, just so it would be easier to add more. That looks better. So now I have all my cars and everything looks good. Let me fix my message. And we'll say our inventory was loaded. Let's run that. There it is, yay. Does everybody work? What you got?
I see your SQL command.
Uh-huh. This one. Yeah, and while you're waiting, try some things. Like I mentioned, this is a really good place to set a breakpoint, and then you can make sure that your SQL code is correct. Because again, if you have any sort of errors there, it's not really going to be very helpful about telling you that. All good? Everybody's working okay? Now, again, this is nuts and bolts, down and dirty, getting down in there where we're controlling every little thing that's going on with accessing the database. So if that looks good, let's start with the stuff that they have for us in the textbook. I'm going to be starting on page 816, creating the Autolot database. So we're going to be creating our same database again. This time we're going to create more than just that inventory table, but we're going to do it on SQL Server Management Studio. Now your assignment for this week says create employee base, and I want to take a look at it before we start on our next project. We're going to have a couple of different parts to this project. It's going to be an employee management system when it's all done, where you could do a complete CRUD system, create, update, and delete employees. So we'll have a forms-based system when we're all done, but it's going to be running on SQL Server. So sometimes, because we have that code that we've all gotten and access is kind of manageable, sometimes students like to use access instead. You have to use SQL Server because it's just going to make it so much easier for you to follow along with the instructions in the book. And it's going to make it to where it's accessible to me a lot easier than if it's access, because we have to worry about that sort of thing. Now, a problem with it being SQL Server. We're running our servers on an Amazon web server and AWS server, and that's fine. It's great. You can get to it from home without any problem. Here at school, they have it locked down like crazy. So you can get to our database server in this room and on the Wi-Fi if you're logged in to the Wi-Fi. You can't on the public Wi-Fi. You have to actually be logged into your student account. They're supposed to have the AWS server open if you're logged into Wi-Fi using a student account. So let me know if you're not being able to access it, and you're going to be able to tell, you know, if you're able to bring up SQL Server Management Studio in this room on your laptop and just fine, and as soon as you walk out the door, you can't bring it up anymore, it just hangs. So that's what it's going to do, is hang until it finally times out. So it's not even a good firewall block where you at least get a message that tells you you've been blocked. It just hangs and then it comes up with an error, like you obviously did something wrong. Your connection string is bad. So just be aware of that. We have really limited access to the server. So this is one reason that I always set my office hours, my student time, around our class. Because if you need to work on this and you need to work on campus, in here might be the most convenient place for you to do that. Now, if you're spending a lot of time in the tutoring lab, because I think they have the majority of the software we need installed, we might be able to get it opened up there. So let me know if you're having a problem with it somewhere so that we can talk to them about it. We've had kind of back and forth discussions between the CIS department and the IT department about this, because they're not super comfortable with these Amazon web servers. So do let me know if you have trouble. Your part of this, I'm going to look at this PDF document. we have this beautiful design document where these people were meeting and they were coming up with their different ideas for this employee system. And they have given us this design saying that they feel like they're going to have, first of all, a base employee, and then we're going to be able to extend that for full-time employees and part-time employees. Our base employee class is going to have the basic information about the employee on it. And if you notice, a lot of these items, data items that of course we would carry, are X'd out because you don't need to worry about carrying 57 data items in your application, just enough for you to really get an experience of using it. So we don't want to have so many different things that it's overwhelming every time you go to do something, just a few data fields. Now, another extension that we're going to have of the employee is a manager. And a manager is a full-time employee. So in the end, we're going to kind of end up with this structure where we have a base employee that is either full-time or part-time, and then a full-time employee could also be a manager. So that's going to be an additional extension of our class. So that's what we're going to end up with in the long run. But for this first part, you just need to create the employee base class. We're going to create the employee base class and the table to go along with it on SQL Server. And then you're going to have a few items in the base class, like the methods that can be overridden and things like that. So for this first part, the big deal is getting into SQL Server on your own and creating that table, putting some test data in it, creating your class for your application, and then when you turn it in, you're going to see what you're going to be turning in is your class code and a screenshot basically of your database table being done. So you should be pretty well qualified to do this, trained appropriately to do this, so that this one shouldn't be too awfully big of a deal, but it should challenge you a little bit. Yeah, it's fine, Mitch. Aaron says you can remote desktop to your home computer, keep it on while you're at school. Chrome remote desktop, that way you don't have to worry about the firewall at school. They have that open, huh? That's weird. A lot of schools have blocked remote logins like that. I guess they would rather you use your home resources than theirs, so awesome. All right, so let's create some database tables. Let's find our SQL Server Management Studio. We found it last time and made sure we could all get logged in pretty much, but that's all we've done with it. So remember, we're looking for SQL Server Management Studio 18, and in our setup stuff on Canvas is a link to download this at home if you don't have it. It's a freebie. I'm going to make sure that I'm looking at my right database instance because I want my 151 server. And then I'm going to get logged in. I want to go in the database section.
It doesn't give me options for that server name. All my server names are blank.
Copy and paste that server name from Canvas. So in Canvas, on lesson 9, there's the big long server name. And once you copy and paste it, and once you've connected to it, using it once, it'll keep it. But that first time you have to enter it. So get that big server name popped in there. Remember, your user ID is your user ID, and your password is just the number part without any leading zeros. Everybody get logged on okay? Troy, you get logged on? Fine, great, thanks, guys. Okay, so I want to go to my database. I'm going to expand it. And I'm going to look at my tables. And right now, I should see that I only have system tables. I don't have any tables of my own that I've created. So let's create one. There's lots of ways we can go about it, but if we right click on tables and choose new table, that'll be the easiest way. When we're working with a database, we can create tables using code. We don't have to use these GUI screens, so we have that choice. So we could actually issue code to create these tables on the fly if we wanted to in our application. It would be kind of ugly, but people do it all the time. So let's see, this first table that I'm going to create, I think will be looks like our inventory table. So we're going to have the same kind of thing we did in Access. First, our car ID. It's not nearly as friendly as Access though, because we're going to have to choose a data type. And I want this one, remember, to automatically update. I want the database to take care of it. So that makes me have to choose some special things. First of all, when you look at the drop down on data types for SQL Server management, dang, SQL Server really blows Access out of the water with the amount of data types, doesn't it? Access gave us like 7 or something. SQL Server gives us a lot. We have to choose int for that auto number type data field. Now, some other things we need to do, because this is going to be our primary key. I'm going to uncheck this allow null, so I can't have a null on a primary key. Now, down at the bottom, I'm going to try to expand this, my column properties. For my car ID column, this one is special. So I need to come down here where it says identity specification and expand that. And I expand it by clicking on the greater than sign. And here where it says is identity, I'm going to change that from no to yes. As soon as I do that, some new fields pop up. Nope, this is a new table. If you find it, right click on tables and do new table. So when I say it is identity, new column, new items pop up, and it gives me the option. It says, what's your seed value? What do you want to start with? Well, we'll start with 1. And then how big do you want your increment for each new row? 1 is fine. So we'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. So that sets up this column to do that auto numbering thing that Access sort of did for us automatically. Now, one last thing, we need to say that this is our primary key. So again, we can right click and say set primary key. Okay, so lots of things on that first column. It was the bad one. First of all, it's named car ID. It's an integer. We don't allow nulls. Down in our properties, we said that it is yes to identity specifications. And our seed and our increment are both 1. So wow, that one was a booger. None of the rest will be bad like that. Now, after our car ID, we want the make. And we said our make was a string. And with SQL Server, we have a lot of different options for strings. Whenever we see something that has this V in it, that means it's a variable length field. So I can set something to n varchar max, and that just basically means that it's going to be, I'm going to click on that. It means that it's going to hold as many characters as it needs to. Now the n means something. I can't think of what at the moment. Oh no, Lex. But I'm going to do varchar max because to me the n means that it's a number, and I want this to be a string. So I'm going to choose varchar max. And that just means that I can set this field up and the database will take care of it, and it'll be variable length. So if it has a bunch of spaces, it won't save all those spaces. It'll only save the manageable, necessary data to the database, so we won't waste a lot of space. Next, I want my color. And I can set my max value to whatever I want. Let's say 50, or May could probably be 50. The only other thing we need then is our pet name. And again, we'll do the same thing. Now, some questions. Should we allow nulls in those fields? They have it checked, so they don't care. It seems to be fine. We should be able to save our database table now. I'm going to right click on this tab and choose Save Table. And I'm going to name it Inventory. In our textbook, they did not name it all uppercase, but we're going to. So we might have a little bit of differences there in some of those code samples. So remember, we've made our table names all be in uppercase. Now, when I look at my tables over here, I'm not seeing that new one. So I'm going to refresh. And sometimes with SQL Management Studio, it can be really persnickety about refreshing and not want to do it. But mine did. It refreshed and it is showing here. So I do see my new table. Now I'd like to add some test data, just like we did in Access. So to add test data, they say, which we can do, right-click the inventory table and choose Edit Top 200 Rows. Now that should make it look kind of like that data grid view in Access that we were looking at earlier. Okay, let's do our data entry again. I've got this black Volkswagen named Zippy. And I've got a Ford named Rusty. And a Saab. And we could probably copy and paste, but we don't really have that much. But we would want to make sure to spend the time to figure out how to do that. If we had too many entries, it wouldn't be worth our time to be re-entering them. We could write a program, huh? We have our BMW. Our green BMW is Hank. And finally, we have a pink named Pinky. Aaron, you have to look at the properties thing and I'll show you. So for this week's assignment, this table, only being an employee table, would be enough to satisfy the requirements, and you would have the associated .cs file that defines that employee class. Remember, at this point, I don't want you to worry about the full-time, part-time, or manager extensions. just the base employee. Here it is, Erin, you go to, when you're clicking on your car ID, go down to the column properties, and in the identity specifications, change it to yes, it is identity. You have to like expand it, and then you can change it to yes. Leave all the rest of it, the defaults, the increment and seed.
The problem I'm having is it won't let me save after that.
What's it do?
It says saving changes is not permitted. The change you have made require the following tables to be dropped and recreated.
Well, if you accidentally got it created once and you don't like it, it's a little different. So you would have to come over here and right click and delete the table. And then you would be able to save it again on the side where you have the tab. So you wouldn't lose your update, but you have to actually delete it to be able to save it again. So since it's a database table, we can't just change it. You should have those permissions, Rich. You should have DBO permissions. So if you don't, then I need to update some things. If you guys can't delete, let me know. All right, I'm going to close out of that. I'll be looking forward to messages from you if you have any trouble or anything along those lines. One thing about databases and tables is it'll make you realize how good it is to be able to save things so easily when we change them. Okay, so you guys all have your debugging ducks, and we're getting ready to do some serious debugging with our database stuff. So I have ducks for you. Our people at home will have to get them later. I'm gonna put on my rubber glove here to grab a duck for you. So come pick one out. This is your C#2 debugging duck. So you better pick good and find one that's really good. I'm ready. Come see which one you want. Here's that assortment. If you want one of these ones up here, grab.
I was my T-shirt one too, so I'll just put it for that one.
There you go. They can start talking and helping you figure things out. You see what you want. That's right. Is it a sign of insanity that you talk to your duck or that you don't talk to your duck? Oh, if it talks back?
It's so stinky cute.
There's not a lot of some of
There's
them.
funny stuff.
Some of them there's like.
The panda duck.
Too many lines. If you think about
Is it? What type of duck is that?
it.
I never got one for another class. This is my first duck.
This one always makes me get early. Rubber ducky songs.
There you go. Anyways, I still gotta figure out what I'm doing.
I love
Lovely.
Christian's big one. That one you've been in the box.
It's just
That's cute. Grab stuff.
This is the classic like yellow rubber ducky one.
All right, guys, get out of here. That should be enough, I hope. And of course, we'll be back Monday and we talk about any problems that you're encountering. But do let me know if you run into stuff, because when you get home, you're going to be installing and having a lot of differences from what we have here. Or it might just be like, I don't remember that happening. It might not have happened here. So let me know and I'll try to get back with you as soon as I can. Bother your study group. Make them help you.
Have a lovely syntax.
Oh, I did tell you. That's so nice.
Need any questions, you know, or me or not? You work today? Oh,
So we
like
can
you're down
go.
to sleepy, right? Do you guys have those boats at the pirate ships, like if someone ordered a flight?
Yeah, that's one of those.
No, you don't need a comment, you need a space.
I've only done it once.
So you're ending up with inventory order by all squished together.
Okay.
And I
He's like,
think,
At least 3 people.
Or one big thing. I could eat a boat full of sushi. I can't remember where you were, I know you told us in Web Dev 2 when you made your own personal site, but I can't remember what it's called.
oh, no, go into it, go ahead and open it. Table name. Oh, it's just a typo.
Well, sure, there's not too many nerds. Right? You guys do noodles too, like udon noodles? I love udon noodles. Oh, your job is the best. I can't, you know. Sorry to keep you on. See ya.
And they just leave it that way.
Look, I got Lady Liberty, because the C# one you gave me was the camo for the, right, Lady Liberty. Is it?
Yeah, I don't know why.
It is.
It's just the
Ordered
way.
by together.
You usually upload
And
things within the
My,
school.
I was spelled.
I tried to. I think we're behind that.
Access.
Isaac was asking, I told her you told him you
Yeah,
were pretty good.
I tell him that, tell him I said.
I won't talk.
What he can do.
Sign insanity. I set in already. Is it tough to-
I'm gonna start being like those other teachers that don't do Zoom sessions.
When will it start talking?
Yeah, Miss Bubbles doesn't. She just.
Oh, wait, I probably should,
Yeah, that's what I should do. No Zoom, everybody come. You know, because like with yesterday,